Welcome, everybody, and thank you so much for taking time out of your day to be here with us. My name is Brad Griffith, and I represent the Oklahoma State Regents for Higher Education as the Associate Vice Chancellor of Innovation, as well as serving as the Capacity Building Work Group Lead for the DOERS3 organization. We're very excited once again to have you all here for this collective conversation that's been put together by three organizations, all working on open educational resources at the national level. That includes DOERS3, which is driving OER sustainability for student success, representing system and consortial-wide OER initiatives. We also have the National Consortium of Open Educational Resources, which represents the regional compacts and their member states, including U.S. territories and affiliated states. We also have SPARC represented today, which serves libraries across the North America states and territories as well. Once again, all three of those groups working toward national strategies towards open educational resources individually and in a collective capacity. Because of the complementary networks and plans ultimately that these groups have developed, we see an opportunity to perhaps better coordinate among ourselves with these organizations. And the idea of a national strategy keeps coming up, or potentially, again, the need to more effectively communicate across these groups, and also really to try to make open education the field that it is and level it up to where it needs to be, especially across North America. Our three groups organized a conference presentation or session on this at OpenEd 23, where we discussed the shared challenges that we experience in the field of open education. And through that conversation, we did realize that there is a deep interest in continuing this discussion about a broad strategy, perhaps at the national level, and also an interest in extending this conversation to more audience members across those networks that I've mentioned. So we hope to use the time that we have with you here today to continue building on this conversation, doing more collective thinking about where we are nationally with open education and what a strategy might mean to you individually from where you sit within your state system or other type of organization working with open education. We do have a focus within this specific conversation within the aspects of the United States higher ed context, but we do welcome all perspectives, in particular as these organizations look perhaps even to expand their scope beyond the simple United States. I do want to start this conversation out today with just a couple of premises, and this is largely based upon our experience of already having had one of these conversations, which was a huge success, and thank you very much if you participated in that first occurrence. The title of this session and the question at hand is meant to be provocative. We don't expect that everybody is going to come to a complete consensus on what this picture may look like, but we need input from the various groups and the organizations that you all represent here today in order to possibly seek the direction which may be unified or at least have an understanding across these organizations of what one another is doing in a more coordinated fashion. We absolutely welcome all views and responses to this question, and that includes a yes, we need a national open education strategy. No, we do not need a national open education strategy, or the maybe, and I'm not sure, which I will fully confess to you all as a participant in the first conversation. I move from a solid yes to a solid maybe on the responses here. So a national strategy can also mean multiple things, and I encourage you not to get too tied up on that particular word of strategy. But think about the element of coordination and what open education as a field might look like a couple of years down the line if we do start to synthesize some of this work a little bit more cohesively across these organizations. And finally, I ask again of every person that's here, if a national strategy is not what is needed or what might be helpful for you within your individual context, what is it that might be helpful? What could these organizations that are out here all seemingly working in the same direction do for you on an individual basis? To give you a brief preview of what today's agenda is going to look like, I will be turning it over soon to my colleague Liliana Diaz, who's here representing WICHE, as well as the National Consortium of OER, to help us kind of survey the room and get a sense of who is actually here with us today. You will then have an opportunity to answer a series of open-ended questions that will rotate in facilitation between myself, Liliana, once again representing NCOER, and Christina Ryman Murphy of the Penn State University, who's here today representing SPARC. So open-ended questions facilitated through Mentimeter. Highly encourage you to contribute to those as those pop up on the screen. And then after that, we will have an opportunity, generally, I believe, around the 40-minute mark of this meeting, to go into breakout rooms. And we have actually recruited a number of facilitators who will identify themselves at that opportunity. And then facilitate just general comments from you all. You'll have an opportunity to share 1 or 2 statements apiece in there and collect the information from you more in a conversational fashion. So without further ado, I am going to go ahead and turn it over to Liliana, who's going to take us away with the Mentimeter.
Hi, everyone. So we encourage you to use your computer or your cell phone or your tablet and to visit menti.com. And you're going to enter the code that appears on the screen, or you can use the QR code that is on the screen. And then we're going to have a couple of questions for you all. And hopefully this will be a great opportunity for your engagement, to share your thoughts, ideas as we go through each of these questions. Please join us at menti.com. Well, so the first question, just to get you warmed up, is what state do you work in? And if you're not in the US, what country are you joining us from? Right, so I'm seeing folks from all over: Minnesota, Pennsylvania, Arizona, California, Texas, Wisconsin, Washington, DC, Ohio. All right, so people from all over the country. I'm seeing folks from all over, coast to coast, which is very exciting to have you all here to share your thoughts and your perspectives. Florida, awesome. Hawaii, welcome. I know it's early for you folks, so thank you for being here. Southeast Michigan. Perfect. And what is your professional role? Librarians, some of my favorite people. All right, some associate vice chancellors, perfect. Scholarly communication librarians, instructional designers, bookstores, school directors, project managers, open educational resources coordinator or open education coordinator. It's fantastic to see the diversity of roles that are joining us today, because this does affect us in very different ways. So it's exciting to get input in here and learn from you all, and how a national coordination strategy may or may not impact the work that you do based on the role that you sit on at your institution or at your system or your state or your province if you're in Canada. Education consultant. Perfect. Course material buyer. Okay, fantastic. It's great to have you all here for this conversation. In how many years have you considered yourself part of the open education community? Right, 6 to 10. Okay, a couple that are new to the field, less than 1 year. You gotta love those folks that have been doing this work for more than a decade. Thank you for being here. 6 to 10. So this is great. There's a lot of variation. So for those folks that are still learning the in and outs of open education, to those that we could probably say are experts. So it's great to have all your perspectives and learning curve in the room. Perfect. This is great. Thank you for being here. Okay, I think we've slowed down, so we should probably go on to the next question. And for this question, we're going to ask it now, and we're going to ask it at the end of our session as well. Do we need a national strategy for open education? So it looks like many folks are still undecided, maybe in the middle. Some folks are saying yes. Okay, no one is saying no. All right. And again, we're going to ask this question again at the end, just based on what conversations you have with other colleagues that are joining us today, to see where we end up at the end of the session. So it looks like the majority are still undecided. All right, so I want to go ahead and pass it on to my colleague, Christina.
Thanks, Ileana. Okay, so now we're gonna ask you a couple questions about the education field. Start off with a little sort of self-reflection of your own place in this work. So what is the end goal that you are working toward through open education? And I'm gonna just be quiet for a minute and let people do some thinking. Okay, so saw a lot of student success pop up here all over the place. um, a lot about equity, removing barriers, people trying to you know, improve access, democratizing the college classroom. I've seen like overall long-term adoption and use of OER by everyone or by the majority. We also have folks looking for equity, cultural relevance, um, students feeling safe and cared for. A lot of accessibility is showing up as well. Um, yeah, making things affordable for sure. And then we have some people getting at more open pedagogy, including students' voices. Um, and we have like right success at our colleges and student enrollment and retention. Wonderful. So a lot of different I guess goals we have here, right, that bring us all into this space together, which is awesome to have a great diversity um amongst us. Okay. So let's looking at the field overall, what would you say are the greatest successes or strengths of open education? I love the community was the first one up there. Lots of people saying community, kindness in the community, the collaborative nature, the flexibility, plus ones for community, alignment of values, focusing on students, removing those barriers again, authentic learning, flexibility. I see that popping up again. A lot on collaboration, willingness to share, right? Not just our resources, but also our practices, and sharing that information equitably. Yeah, flexibility for the instructor. I like that someone kind of talked about different kinds of flexibility, personalization, cooperation, student centeredness. Someone's put up there ownership of resources rather than publishers. And you could also probably say ownership of resources for students as well, right? Um, yeah, that things are, sort of cross campus, general information, things aren't campus specific. Saving students money is coming up, working closely with faculty to use their expertise in a more equitable manner, assistance. Someone at the bottom there has said setting a model for public use of digital technologies. So like big goals. Wonderful. Lifelong learning, expanding access, powerful base of support for knowledge to be free for all. On that note, on that really big note, I'm gonna turn it over and back to Brad.
Thank you very much, Christina. So we're going to transition into the opposite end of the previous question and ask you all, what are the greatest challenges, threats, or gaps facing open education today? And again, we'll wait a couple seconds for the responses to roll in. I'm going to go ahead and shout out to the inclusive and equitable access. I expect that to pop up a number of times in the responses here. It's interesting to see these coming in the way they are. Sustainability, lack of leadership support, and funding, those can all tie together within a vacuum sometimes. Absolutely. Low awareness at K-12 of the benefits of open education, well worth exploring for sure. Co-opting of the business models of open education, I think that that's a big concern for us, particularly as we see the growing onslaught of inclusive and equitable access at our institutions. Unfunded mandates, again, it takes funding ultimately to accomplish the goals of open education. Whether you're at a system level, an individual institution, or the faculty doing the work, you need support ultimately to achieve these goals. Yeah, automatic textbook billing, once again, still highlighting in there. Let's see. lack of content in many subjects, which I think keeps improving over time, largely because of the work that we're encouraging as a collective. Lack of awareness of these resources. We visit this every single day within the state of Oklahoma. Lack of awareness of what is happening and the progress that's made on a minute-by-minute basis within open education. Lack of knowledge by our legislators. And again, I think this is where you can even lean on your educational compacts to help solve some of these issues and give you some of the potential talking points of open education that you could share with your legislators. I like the one that mentioned on here that we need to think bigger. Again, what does open education look like if this becomes the level of being a field of research, for example, something that again grows well beyond what our vision is today for this community and what it is that we're doing. Invisible labor, once again, I really appreciate the mention of that because it's really the unspoken word. It takes an ecosystem of individuals to support faculty as they go through the open education process in their courses. Faculty sometimes don't want to change in their course lessons. I think that that's a big concern as well. We want to make sure that faculty do have the autonomy to be able to select materials best suited to meet their learning outcomes. OER is trying, I think, in a way, I agree with this point, to try and fix structural issues within higher education. And that's something to be well explored, I think. Commercial forces, once again, mentioned there, tying back again to the inclusive and equitable access largely. Appreciate that +1 again of the invisible labor. Yeah. Yeah, content discovery is kind of a mess. And that's something I know that came up in the last conversation that was had with this group. Do we need more unified strategies, for example, around curation of materials and discoverability of materials? Shifting us over to the next question. From your perspective, how well coordinated is the US open education field today? And again, the responses rank from 1 to 5, with 1 being poorly, 5 being very well. Again, pretty standard bell curve that's forming here, although I would argue that it certainly leans more towards the poor end than it does the very well coordinated end. Again, indicative that this conversation for us today is very important to have. And again, I hope when you get to your breakout rooms, you'll share your perspectives, especially those of you who may have ranked this as a 1 or a 4. What contributed to your point of view? And again, solid 2s here across the board. All right, Liliana, turning it back to you.
Thanks, Brad. So our next question for you all is, what would transform your open education work? What would a national strategy, how could that transform the work that you do in open education? So the first one definitely that stands out, I think, is not having to battle for funding or compete for funding. And that advocacy piece. So how do we advocate possibly for additional funding to support our work and more capacity? Because it's not just funding, but also how do we have more manpower or people power to be able to do this work effectively? How do we obtain the support of administrators, which tends to be a challenge, especially if they get confused as to the differences between IA, EA, and OER. What does that mean? Especially when some of our language is co-opted. A central source for information or support or funding, and maybe federal policy that requires all colleges receiving federal funds to implement a policy to support OER. How do we advocate for that as a community? And how do we maybe duplicate our work less, if not at all? That would be the goal, right? To be able to coordinate so we're all leveraging our skills and the things that we contribute and bring to the open ed community without duplicating efforts. And how do we do open for credit assessments at the college level? That's very intriguing, and I hope whoever wrote that expands and elaborates a little bit more in the breakout sessions we do later. It sounds like there's a couple of folks that are interested definitely in federal policy and guidance for open and reduction of duplication. And then how do we create open or position open so it becomes a line item in our budget and not a one-time funding allocation from our administration? Looks like more data to support OER, which I think goes back to what Brad shared a little bit about what is a research agenda for OER or open like as a collaborative among everyone in the community. And sustainability, as well as communication. So to increase better collaboration among all the organizations and the work that we do, as well as lead to more coordinated advocacy. Right. Tell me what to do about AI. I think we're all trying to figure that one out as AI keeps evolving and becoming more innovative as the days go by. So that one is kind of a challenge because we don't know what that's going to look like in a week. So that's definitely a fair point. Recognition of the power of open education for students to achieve success, leading to more collaboration and funding. Yeah, definitely. And a hub for communication and collaboration. Perfect. Well, the next question is what would, this one's really for about national strategy. So what would a national strategy look like to you? And how would you define strategy? So again, what should a national strategy look like to you? And how should we define, or how would you define strategy? So it looks like federal support and funding for the work that we do, and more recommendations and mandates. Yeah, definitely. Depends, I think, state to state, how they support OER or open education broadly. Working toward a set shared priorities in a coordinated way. And how do we coordinate advocacy and provide a centralized place for support to do so? Joint advocacy. So if you're going to be, if whoever put joint advocacy, when you're in a breakout group, if you can elaborate on that, we definitely welcome that. Okay, I don't know what a national strategy will look like, but I define strategy as a way to do coordinated work. Fantastic. Collection of policies and practices, programs, and people aimed at coordination, but customizable to agenda and goals. That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. Oh, I like this one too, a theoretical framework for open pedagogy. How do we support teaching and learning in the classroom? And sustainable goals where we are teaming up instead of competing. Yeah, and I think that definitely goes hand in hand with this conversation of coordination. How do we leverage and coordinate the things that we're really good at, so we're not duplicating efforts or competing with others? National Professional Association, where we publish policies and engage in lobbying to our legislatures. Lobbying for more funding. So we're seeing that as a need that maybe a national strategy could fill. And then how do we plug into local work, the work that we do at a local level into a national call for action? Fantastic. Yeah. So let's see here. Give faculty choices to opt out so as to not lose educators. I welcome you to elaborate definitely in the breakout sessions on that particular idea, and moving past pilot projects towards sustained federal, state, and local support for OER. So these are all fantastic ideas for what a national strategy looks like. Topic. So I want to pass it on to my colleague, Christina.
Thanks, Liana. Okay, so now that folks have kind of set out how they think about what a national strategy might look like, I'd like you to get a little specific. And if we had a national strategy, what priorities or objectives would you want it to achieve? Specifically, funding, yes. Feel free, if you think funding, to put funding in there as often as you'd like. Onboarding, centering equitable labor practices, focusing on sustainability. That was one of the things that I was thinking about as well. The standards of practice. Okay, so some standards are popping up. Searchable repository of resources, a national vision, empowering grassroots agents to focus on their local communities. Some people have put in best practices, collecting data, higher quality metadata, legislation, deduplications for sure, more funding, shared language. Okay, so some maybe shared definitions around open and open education, best practices, training, guidance on tracking data, better open publishing practices for all federally funded projects. I see standards in there coming up a number of times. That's really interesting. This is the second session, and each one has been different in what has highlighted here. So it's really great that you all came today to bring such different ideas. Discovery, regulations, protecting students from forced textbook costs. Someone's got right toolkits, blueprints, sponsorship. Again, about discovering and finding OER, ways to incentivize institutions. Compensation, yes. Yeah, equal value of OER and tenure process, how to get at that goal for sure. Toolkits, copyright reimagining, admin work centralized. I think that gets at to like deduplication efforts among all of us. Clearinghouses, state policies and federal policies. Okay, wonderful. Okay, so let's flip that and do the opposite. What wouldn't you want from a national strategy? Is actually a really, really possibly one of the most important questions. It's for people to share this here. So mandates, yes, faculty will freak. Seeing a lot of mandates coming up. One size fits all, any top-down mandates, more duplication, and that showed up in what we would want, right? Deduplication, gatekeeping, regulations, forced changes. That OER I see it as the only path to affordability, exclusion, anything that takes away from faculty academic freedom or devaluing them as subject matter experts. And something that's actually coming up for me is in thinking about this, I know there's a lot of librarians here, but right, how could we make teaching faculty really part of this national strategy, right? So that is something that I've been thinking about in these conversations. More bureaucracy, poorly written laws or regulations, state issues, and culture wars. Yeah, too much bureaucracy that it doesn't function. Neoliberal gunk, vagueness. I'm not gonna read all those. I do not need, but I think those are great things that are there about what we need, right? A limited perspective, nothing that Congress needs to decide. Consolidation of power centers and the marginalization of minority voices, regulations. Okay, thank you, everyone. That's really useful. And I'm going to turn it back to Brad.
Thank you very much, Christina. Next question that we have here is, what capabilities would the field need in order to develop and execute a national strategy or coordinated plan? First few responses rolling in, a director, staffing, I think, and somebody that can be a rallier is very important here, whether that's an individual organization, what that capacity may be. Twitter, I also will just give the shout out there. I know that Twitter used to be a very heavy community for open education, and that's not the case anymore. Do we have a substitute, for that, something that's at the same level that we previously had? Spokespersons from our states. I think that that's very important and goes back to the previous comments about mandates not being something that would work out of a national strategy. We have to have the ability for individual states and consortia to be able to see themselves in whatever this might end up looking like. Lobbying representatives, I see a couple of times there, again, bringing more awareness at that national legislative level about what open education is and the benefits for our learners and higher education in general. And again, not just higher education, but P12 as well. Support from leaders even at the local level. Again, knowing what other states are doing in order to advocate for open education can be very helpful. We don't have to reinvent the wheel, but how do you locate the wheel if you don't know where it is, or maybe you're new ultimately to this field? Good governance and bylaws, I think, is also great. And I know that many of the organizations that are part of this conversation embody those practices very well. Simple public messages and memes, I think that that's a great strategy of communication, even for faculty in order to recruit them, students, to inform them of the benefits of this work that we're doing, can be very helpful, again, to open up more informal language here. Experience again with writing legislation, funding requests and bills. I know once again, in particular, there's a conversation that will take place on state and consortial system grant models for open education. And again, what can we learn from each other? How can we coordinate with one another through such a strategy here potentially? Funding, I think, is a big looming question here. If there were an organization to be developed, how would it be funded? I know some of the OER organizations and collectives out there have been able to seek funding from grant organizations. But again, if this is something working at the national level, what might that look like if we have a collective of regional compacts, states, consortia, all these other different groups that are working together? Use of open and public tools and platforms, again, I think that's great. Sharing things is really, I think, one of the bigger challenges we experience in discoverability. Next question here is, what would a community-driven process to develop this national strategy look like if it were to be done? Who needs to be involved in this conversation? Students, thank you for putting them as the first ones. I completely agree that they do need to be involved in this conversation from the start. Faculty and staff as well, emphasis on faculty there. They, again, are the ones that are responsible for selecting content for the courses that they teach and ensuring that the outcomes are met. We can't do this without them. Everyone, again, it's an ecosystem of individuals that support these activities on campus. None of us are an island in the open ed world. Advisors, again, I think they're a great one to bring in. I certainly used to sit as an academic advisor and look at the cost of materials with students who were concerned about courses from one section to the next, being able to help them pick the best option for them. Policymakers, certainly beneficial. State OER organizations, I would even add SHIOs to that as well. Those that have a coordinating capacity for education within their states certainly should be involved in the conversation. I appreciate the mention away as well for the concerted lean away from powerful corporate interests. I think that open education in general does advocate for something that's a little bit different than that. I appreciate that mention there. Registrars, financial aid officers, and more, again, could be a very important component of this conversation, especially in light of the negotiated rulemaking that's taking place right now, and how some of these models for material selection may change on campuses, certainly. Mapping OER to larger goals and projects that people are familiar with supporting, I very much appreciate the mention of that as well. I know within the DOERS3 organization, we're looking forward to exploring things like the intersection of workforce alignment with open education and what that looks like with micro-credential programs, for example. Where is it that we could expand open education beyond what it is that we're doing today? I think innovators are going to be a big part of this process. And again, university leaders also seen a couple of times in there. You do have to have your administrative support on board. There is a change of model that takes place when an institution decides to go all in on open education. May change, for example, the relationship they have with their bookstore. And again, how this is funded, that is a big question that would need to be addressed. All right, Liliana, back to you.
So we definitely want to make sure that we capture any and all ideas that you have that maybe weren't captured in the previous question. So are there any other things that you would like to share with the community that is here today? As well as these will be captured and shared in the March 7th webinar or meeting that's happening during Open Education Week, where we will share the results. So thanks for a chance to patiently think about this. Know that these are conversations that many of us are having in our communities and at our institutions, at our systems, states. And Haley just posted a link to that follow-up webinar that's happening on March 7th, where we'll share kind of what we all learned from these 3 conversations. So please register for that. So anything else you would like to share? People who left Twitter, where did you go? I have that question too, because Mastodon is not cutting it for me. Too confusing for me. It has to be a multi-level approach, a groundswell and a downpour, keep it up. So from the bottom and the top, and we meet in the middle. see. Thank you for modeling collaboration and thinking big picture. Please don't forget the importance of having K-12 in the conversation. And all IHEs receiving federal funds must establish a policy to support faculty use of OER on the court. So again, like some federal policies and support. National cloud storage to house resources could be really helpful for sustainability. So this is something that we've definitely heard multiple times in that first session as well. All right, so we're going to ask this question again. Do we need a national strategy for open education? Based on what you've heard and from your colleagues and friends that are committed to open education, do we need a national strategy for open education? Looks like overwhelming yes from folks. We do have 67 participants in the room, so we're getting close to having everyone respond to this question. Okay, so it looks like we can, during this conversation, many of you have convinced your colleagues that we do need a national strategy for open education. And there's still some folks that are not sure. And if you're not sure, definitely during the breakout sessions, please share why you're not sure. Perfect. So we're going to go ahead and split you into breakout rooms, and we do encourage you to engage and elaborate on some of the responses that you shared during the previous couple questions.
Thank you very much, Liliana. And Annika, if you wouldn't mind stopping the recording for us, please. So everybody,